Hi. In many of the theories we've talked about so far, a common thread has centered on change. The idea that change is inevitable in a relationship and that having a productive, functional relationship doesn't necessarily require minimizing change and increasing stability. What it means is often finding a way to effectively deal with change in relationships. Today, we're going to talk about the relational turbulence model, the brainchild of Leanne Knobloch, who argues about the inevitability of change in a relationship as we move through various stages of relationships. She wants to look at the ways in which relationship transitions require or accompany polarizing emotions. These emotional polarizations affect the ways in which we interact with each other. Her work emerged from research looking at the transition from casual dating relationships to more serious relationships. And what she found was that there was an increase in conflict, an increase in the frequency of negative emotions, and an increase in relational thinking that came along with this transition to a more intimate relational stage. People engaged in more conflict, people experienced more negative emotions, and they found themselves thinking, uh, what does it mean to be in this relationship? Now, if you want to buy into Knobloch's theory, there are some assumptions you have to consider. One is the assumption that relational qualities are constantly ebbing and flowing, they're dynamic. And so studying a relationship requires ideally that we do it longitudinally, that you don't go in and take a single survey and claim to know to understand a relationship that way. That at the very least, you gather data at multiple points, and in fact, ideally, you'd want to do it fairly continuously. Um, these changes that we see often, well, for Knobloch, the changes that she's most interested in are changes in relational uncertainty and dyadic coordination. When she speaks of relational uncertainty, she's talking about the two partners' uncertainty about themselves, about each other, and about the relationship itself. And when she speaks of dyadic coordination, she's talking about the effort these two people engage in to complete routine behaviors, to coordinate their everyday goals. This is a process in which partners influence each other, and that influence can be perceived as facilitation, as helpful, or as interference. Another assumption of the theory is that we can measure these relational qualities, that we can measure them by looking at emotional responses, by looking at cognitive responses, and by looking at communicative responses. Hence, we're studying this in a course on communication. The theory also assumes that relational uncertainty and partner interference are heightened in the early stages of a relational transition. That when the transition occurs in our relationship is suddenly a more serious one than it was before, our initial inclination is to see our partner's behaviors as more interference than facilitation. However, so don't freak out yet, over time, that relational uncertainty tends to lessen as the stage of intimacy in that relationship continues. So initially we experience a high level of uncertainty and a high level of perceptions of partner interference, but over time those things lessen as the relationship becomes more intimate for a longer time. So we have our doubts at first, but as we resolve those doubts, The correlate is forming a more intimate bond with the partner. Another assumption of the theory, of the turbulence model, is that negative relationship outcomes tend to be linked to relational uncertainty and to the perception that our partner is interfering with us, with our efforts. But when we communicate openly with each other about our uncertainty, one of the relational outcomes is increased intimacy. So go figure, here is a communication theory that reminds us of the importance of communicating with each other in relationships. The theory also talks a great deal about perception, both directly and indirectly. The relationship between intimacy and perception that Knobloch acknowledges in this model simply suggests that when a partner is involved in helping us to pursue our everyday goals, we're probably more likely to perceive that involvement as interference, as intrusive in a low intimacy relationship. But when we move to a more intimate relationship, when we go through a transition to a more intimate relationship stage, we're more likely to view those behaviors as facilitation, as helpful. As a result, we involve each other in activities more often in more intimate relationships. It's one of the ways that we can measure the level of intimacy in a relationship. Um, we generate less disruption in those stages and more facilitation. There's the theory in a nutshell. Now, I would like to close by telling you about what I believe to be the two most important developments in the theory in the 15 to 20 years since it's been developed. The first one lies in our definition of a change in a relationship, or the points of change in a relationship. Initially, Knobloch wanted to know about that point at which a relationship moved from a casual dating relationship to a more serious one. And that's part of our cultural courtship ritual. But more recently, Knobloch and other scholars have admitted that a significant relational transition can happen at any time, not just at those major markers like becoming a serious couple, becoming exclusive, getting engaged, getting married, moving in together, whatever. There are more of those stage markers than we have looked at before. And so more recently, we've seen scholars look at key life events, key turning points, things like unpredictable occurrences like family illnesses, sad occurrences like family illnesses and miscarriage and infertility. And in an age of electronic media and social media, another development has occurred in the acknowledgement of online disclosures about a relationship being an important marker of a relational stage. The idea, for instance, that declaring yourself as part of a couple online is a turning point, is a point of change in a relationship at which that relationship can become more serious, making a relationship Facebook official, to use a term that my students use sometimes. So the first of those two theoretical developments is that we have a broader view of what constitutes a relational transition. The second one is a methodological development. Knobloch and company started their work solely as quantitative social scientific work. However, over time, we've seen this model co-opted by qualitative researchers who are asking questions that the model can serve to answer as well. For instance, the model, when used by qualitative scholars, can be used to try to understand the impact of changes in uncertainty in a relationship in ways that a survey either can't or hasn't yet. There are qualitative researchers out there who suggest the radical thought that maybe if we want to understand the changes one perceives in a relationship, maybe we should ask them about the changes they perceive in a relationship. That is not a jab at quantitative research, but simply an observation that this is work that is relevant to qualitative and quantitative researchers. And because of that, I am especially excited to see how this theory continues to develop over the next couple of decades.